Yes, so I am the Director of Identity Standards at Microsoft, and that is a relatively new role, but Microsoft has been very active in the standards world for years and years now. But they are advancing their stake in identity standards because they feel that it is so strategic for the company and also for the industry. So I'm not going to talk too deeply about the standards. I'm going to give you some examples that hopefully you guys can use to learn more, or you can just mock me for all my angle brackets and curly braces. We'll just see how it goes. So obviously we have to start with Haiku. This is a guest Haiku. This is actually from a guy named Alex Weinert. He is one of the inventors of CA. His team works on CA all the time. And in fact, there is a presentation at the end of these 2 days by somebody named Nitika Gupta, who is brilliant. She works for Alex, and you'll really enjoy her talk, I guarantee it. This, by the way, is apparently a common reason for support calls at the Microsoft Help Desk. Administrators that decide to turn on MFA for all administrators, but they don't actually have MFA turned on for themselves at the moment they enable the policy. So, karma. It's all about karma. So, a quick bit of information about me personally. As Gil mentioned, I'm Canadian. Work for Ping Identity. I am married to an Australian, so you can imagine what that's like. And most importantly, I got my start, literally my start, at the Directory Experts Conference in, I want to say 2006. So I was where you were in 2005. I attended, I asked a lot of questions, I dug deep, and the next year I had something I thought people would want to see. And so I applied to speak at the Directory Experts Conference. And this is after 4 years of applying at the Gartner conference, the Catalyst conference, and being denied. And it's hard for 4 years to get denied. And so I was so excited to be part of this community, and I was embraced by the community. So all of you here who maybe see the people who are up here, if you need to know that we were once sitting in your spots right there. And we're very interested to have those same sort of enthusiastic, amazing conversations about what we're building and why, and what things suck and what things are brilliant. So please make sure you talk to us all because we're all really excited about it. All right, so my team at Microsoft. Sorry, I don't want to have a coughing fit. Oh, that was close. Yeah, don't drink that. All right, sorry. The identity standards team at Microsoft is kind of an odd duck team in that we write specifications. Our work takes years. We have to, I shouldn't stand in front of that. Right, we have to design something that will not see the light of day for years and years and years. And it has to stand the test of time. And so the way that the international standards community works is we all show up 3 times, 4 times a year, right? Go to a beautiful place and then lock ourselves in a room and argue about tiny, tiny little details for a long time. Now, if that sounds like fun, you should come talk to me because we're always looking for people in the standards world. We work in different standards organizations, including the FIDO Alliance, including the OpenID Foundation, including IETF and W3C. So there's lots of work to do at different layers in the stack, right? Some of it's at the web layer, some of it's at the networking layer, some of it's, crypto, et cetera, et cetera. So there's really interesting problems still being solved. Okay, so how does it impact you? Why do you care about identity standards? Well, the bottom line is, the reason why you can go to Target and buy a lamp and then walk to Home Depot and buy a light bulb and then take the whole concoction home, plug it into your wall, screw it together, and it works. Those are standards, right? All they do is they allow people who manufacture things to write to specifications instead of having to create a proprietary connector, right? And we all know what it's like to live with proprietary connectors. They're horrific. They're brittle. They break, right? Every time one piece of your moving concoction iterates, you have to go back and rewrite everything. And so the idea of a standard is to create a layer of abstraction, right? And by creating that layer of abstraction, you allow people to innovate independently, right? So we have identity standards like SAML. We have identity standards like OpenID Connect. There's, TLS, Transport Layer Security, right, is a standard. HTTP is a standard. All of these things are these legacy of specifications, and every time we write something on top of it, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. And so it's wonderful to be able to just learn REST and have a pretty good idea that you can write, create a REST object, and it's probably going to get parsed okay, and it's probably going to have, meaningful content to whoever decides to parse it. That's the kind of thing that we work on. So what I want to talk to you about today, though, are standards around veracity, standards around accountability. How do you know if something that is claimed is really the thing that is claimed? Well, we usually do this by trying to negotiate a secret, right? So a secret, in theory, is something that is not well known, right? The more secret the thing can be, the better off you are as far as discovery goes, right? Well, we use two types of secrets generally. Okay, I can't wait to see who argues with me on this. And you're totally welcome to argue, by the way. All right, so there are two kind of granddaddy secrets in the technology world, right? And the first one is a shared secret. And we know how crappy shared secrets are. But shared secrets exist for a very specific reason, right? I mean, there's fancy shared secrets like symmetric cryptography. But for the most part, what we try to do with a shared secret is negotiate something between a human and a machine, right? So something that's too complicated for you to remember, but too easy for the machines to guess, right? That's kind of our lives, right? But we see different instantiations of shared secrets these days. We see, obviously, passwords, which are horrible, horrible things, right, that users hate, and also horrible things that computers can really easily break, right? They have to be negotiated. This password here, summer 2018, Nitika, are you going to talk about that? Yeah. Okay, so Nitika is at the back of the room there. So I won't tell you how awesome that password is, because she will. However, we also have things like API keys, right? So we're not just authenticating users, we're authenticating software, right? How do you authenticate software? Well, these days you do really terrible de facto standard things like set an API key, right? And then you save it in a file called apikey.txt, right? And you may or may not change the permissions on that file. And then you may or may not check it into your source code repository, at which point somebody who's looking for exactly those things just goes and picks it up and uses it, right? They're not so great. They have problems, right? They can also be longer and more mnemonic, and if you look at things like password managers, we have options that are coming up right now, right? But ultimately, if we could take this one secret sharing mechanism out of the whole mix, we could change the way that we, in fact, perform security across the board, right? How many passwords, I mean, if you guys were to think of in your environments, how many different shared secrets do you think are configured, right? So you've got your password, API keys, hundreds? Millions. Okay, a lot, right? They are problematic. And of course, we do have an alternative, right? The alternative is asymmetric cryptography, right? A private public key pair, right, that you create. Okay, so the interesting thing about this private key here is that you can tell this is a private key. It doesn't matter what file you name it. It doesn't matter what database row you stick it in, because it actually has data embedded that self-describes, right? So I can actually find RSA private keys, but with a simple string search, no matter where my developers put them and no matter how responsibly they treat them, or irresponsibly, depending on the world, right? So this private key is truly a private key, okay? There is no reason you ever have to give this private key to anyone. And if you think of the best practice around private keys, you do something called a certificate signing request, CSR. How many people here have done a CSR in their long and storied lifetimes? Right. So you generate the key where it's going to stay. It never crosses the wire, right? And then you use signatures or signing, right, to prove that you have possession of the key. Proof of possession. It's the best thing ever, okay? Now, if you're super fancy, you're going to use something called a hardware security module, or an HSM. And the whole concept of an HSM is that it's a black box. It's an abyss, right? The key gets generated in there, and it just magically signs things, but you can't actually get it out. You can't copy it. You can't do any of these things, right? So these are big deals. These are like, this is lore. This is, what, 40-year-old lore, I think, at least, to have this work, right? So, okay, so we have these two things. We have a private key. We have a shared secret. Now, how many people here know the difference between a key and a certificate? All right, somebody yell it, not you two. Go ahead. What's the difference?
Well, the certificate is just the link between the key and an authority you trust.
Right, perfect. So a certificate binds information to a key, right? So a key in and of itself is literally a mathematical proof. It doesn't mean anything. When you start looking at something like an X509 certificate, now you're taking information, right? You're binding it to a proof, and the proof means something, right? So I assert that this web server is www.bing.com. So say I, the certificate authority, right? The big, heavy, difficult certificate authority that's out there, right? You think of GeoTrust or any of these really huge CAs. They've been around for a long time, and there's a ton of process involved, right? They take a private key, they generate a private key, right? Or actually what they do is they ask you to submit a certificate signing request. They will sign your certificate, right? And when they do that, they make that signature once, right? And then it lasts, what, usually a year. You get to specify, but most people choose a year, right? So I don't know if you know this, but it's better now, but a lot of single sign-on would have once-a-year failures. It would be rock solid. Yeah, you can see all the heads nodding. Yeah, right? It's rock solid. You can set it and forget it, and then your certificate expires, right? And then, that's right. And then everyone runs around like chickens with their head cut off, and then the certificate's back and everything runs again, right? That is, this is a credential, right? A big, heavy credential. All right, so the funny thing is, this is just the beginning, right? Certificates started, there was this big idea of the year of PKI, client certificates. There was a real vision of how everything was going to get signed and everything was going to have a certificate. But it couldn't survive the heaviness of the entire infrastructure, right? How many people here run local PKIs? Yeah, okay. You kind of have to, right? You have to run it. Now, how many people here think it's a breeze to operate the certificate? Okay, all right, well, that makes sense. All right, so, but what happened was we operate our certificate authorities to give authority within our domain, right? To sign entities, to accredit entities within our domain, right? Well, all of a sudden, domains started shifting, right? We started having to send our users out of our domain to access applications, right? Single sign-on, cloud, all of that stuff happened. And so what happened was the things that we had to attest, the things that we had to sign, the messages, right, that were going out, they changed. And what they all of a sudden changed to is instead of a thing you are, they became a thing that's happening, right? Hey, there's a user. This user is showing up at your website, and I, the identity provider, would like to introduce that user to you, right? That is what SAML is. It's like a letter from your parents, right? Dear Mrs. Peabody, please allow Seymour to go on vacation on the school trip, right? This Saturday afternoon, right? That's what it is. It's an authority vouching on behalf of a user. Okay, so now, before, if you think of what a certificate is, there is no audience for a certificate. It's like, to whom it may concern. This web server is pretty awesome and you should probably trust it, right? This is more specific, right? To one audience, one relying party, right? This relying party should trust this user under these circumstances, right? And by the way, the user's first name is Pamela and their last name is Dingle, yeah? So we're including more information and we're traveling across domains, right? And not only that, a SAML assertion generally has a validity window of 5 minutes, right? All depends on your implementation, but it's a much, much shorter process. I've signed a thing, it means something for 5 minutes, and then you should discard it. Right? Okay, so now we've sort of have this idea of traveling across websites. Well, now we get things like OAuth that occur. What is beautiful and strategic about OAuth is that it allows you now to identify the software, right? When a piece of software makes an OAuth authorization request, it is identifying itself and is asking for access to act, often on behalf of another user, right, to access a resource. Okay, so it's now a three-party system, not a two-party system, right? But the beauty of it is now you're tracking more identities, right? You are tracking the software, you're tracking the resource it's going to, and it's starting to be air traffic control, right? So you're watching these tokens start to flow all over the place. And not only that, what this does is eliminates passwords. It eliminates shared secrets, because the de facto standard before OAuth came along for API access, do you guys remember, do you know what it is?
Type your password in here.
First name, yeah, username, colon, password, base 64 encoded, right, or URL encoded to be perfectly technical, right, and submitted on every single API fetch. That is the de facto standard. Okay, so you think of the pain and misery of that. So that means that every resource that is accepting that string has to be able to validate it, right? So now every API everywhere has to be able to validate your users' passwords and can collect your users' passwords and can harvest your users' passwords, right? It's scary, right? So OAuth 2 gives you this identity, but it also creates this token ecosystem of things flowing around, right? Okay, well, really what that means is that we're changing. We used to think of authentication as essentially stateless, right? You would authenticate the user, you would forget that you ever authenticated them in the first place, and you would set a cookie, and you move on to the next thing, right? That's how it began, right? Check a string, check your shared secret, forget. Check your shared secret, forget. Then what happened was people started attacking, right? They figured this out, so they just started asking, is it this password? Is it this password? And they said, okay, well now you can only ask 3 times, and then we'll forget, right? So login history, right? Login attempts get stored in Active Directory. You're still not remembering, okay? Those days are gone. Those days are gone right now, okay? You can't just authenticate and forget people anymore. You have to authenticate and remember. So if you think of everything that identity security protection is doing in Microsoft, is them remembering. It's them looking at trends. It's them understanding that a single IP address spawned 4,000 incorrect password attempts, right? The same password, right? 4,000 different usernames, right? You have to be remembering. You have to be paying attention to do that. You can't just have it be stateless, right? So what's happening now is that we're starting to watch signals. So this, what you see here, is from a specification called SecEvent. IETF makes it. It's called SecEvent. And what it is it's a logout signal, right? So imagine a world now where all of these signals are starting to arrive, right? Hey, Pam Dingle logged in. Oh, hey, Pam Dingle reset her password. Oh, hey, Pam Dingle went to her bank. Oh, hey, Pam Dingle reset her password there, right? Oh, hey, Pam Dingle just wire transferred $50,000 to, Cambodia, right? Those are things that every single one of them, when you look at them singly, they don't mean a lot. But as soon as you see them as a story, right, you kind of realize that Pam's probably in some trouble, right? She's not having fun. So logout is a signal, right? I mean, if you think of what single logout is, right? Single logout is a signal. Hey guys, Pam just logged out of her identity provider. Right? That may affect your security context. Maybe you should do something about it, all you relying parties out there, right? It's exciting. It's like little messages are starting to, little love letters, if you will. Okay, the question is, who is writing the love letters? How do we get all of the things that could tell you information about your users, your devices, your software? How do we get them all to start writing these little tiny signals, right? Well, first of all, you have to make sure they're real. Right? And the great thing about where we've come from is it used to be, if you think of PKI is, the certificate authorities are so important because if they're compromised, it's disaster, right? It's disaster, right? Well, we're getting into a place now where there's lots of little signals. Some of those signals could be wrong, right? So you're not going to believe all the signals. You're going to assume that some of them are actually going to be breached at different times. But what we want is enough signal to noise ratio that you can make smart decisions and you can see the trends, right? You can see things start to get compromised, right? And you discount those signals until the wave comes down, and then you move on to the next thing and you start to discount that. The trick is you have to be able to know when people are making mistakes, right? So certification, if you want to automate all of this, right, where everything is starting to attest stuff, right? Your operating system attests that it hasn't been rooted, and your software attests, right, that it has a token that works for a given user. Then you have to be able to tell if they're doing simple things wrong, like not validating signatures, right? So there was a funny story where a very large car sharing company wrote their own SAML relying party, right, which isn't really recommended for obvious reasons. They didn't actually, they didn't check the signature at all. So anyone who wrote any assertion that claimed to be, for example, the CEO could just log right in. So these things are important. All right, so now comes the fun part. Okay. Sorry, I hope it doesn't. So I want to talk about a very specific standard that is changing. So we have this world now, right? We have all these messages flying around, right? But we still have the user who cannot participate, right? Who cannot be automated in this same process. So the standard that we're working on now is called FIDO, Fast Identity Online. And what FIDO is a way to get users involved in this idea of attestation, right? How do you take a user and somehow get their activities to generate, attestations, right? Simple things. So what FIDO does, it releases a private key when a user performs an activity, right? No different than what you probably do for Touch ID today, right? You log in, you select your app, it prompts you for your finger, you touch your finger to the phone, you get to continue, right? But that only works, on mobile, and it isn't the same everywhere. Well, FIDO is trying to standardize that. All right, so I have a whole bunch of them here, right? They're little guys. This one here. This one here, the Fingerprint Reader, right? All of these different pieces of hardware all now speak the same standard. They're all FIDO enabled. This one also has a fingerprint reader on it. Okay, so now imagine this. This laptop can essentially be fingerprint enabled now by any cloud web server, right? Anyone who speaks the FIDO2 protocol, and specifically the WebAuthn protocol, can now say, hey, Windows 10, go get their fingerprint, or go do a user dance, okay? And the user can use their fingerprint. Now imagine you only have fingerprint readers on 80% of your hardware, right? Well, that's okay, right? People who don't have the hardware can have a one that's portable. They can take it with them, right? Like this is literally a little portable Touch ID right here, right? This biometric, right? You enroll your fingerprint, and now you can take this to any computer, regardless of what the hardware is, and you can use it to log in, right? This is actually a dongle that works with a mobile app, right? So now what I can do, in fact, is I'm going to log in. I'm going to plug in this dongle, and I'm just going to tap it, right? And a little confirmation will come up, and all my credentials are now on my phone, right? I'm a developer. Let's say I want to do testing, right? I have to test with 10 different accounts. I can have 10 different accounts on this one phone, or I can have 10 different accounts on this one key, right? So now I can say, test Jane Smith, right? Go, right? Test John Newsom, go, again and again, right? So the usability of these are pretty good, but it's only the beginning, right? What these are, some people may love and some people may hate. But because the standard is created now, there is room to innovate, right? So this is the idea somebody had now. But in a year, there could be something completely different, right? There's another one that's a fitness ring, right? So it's got a heart detector on it, counts your steps, all that stuff. It's also an authenticator, right? So you want to log in, you're going to tap it. All right, so let's just talk about some of the details here. And I'm telling you all this because I really want you to try it, right? I want you to go and play. There's going to be some really exciting announcements coming out shortly, and you will want to try this, right? It works, the enterprise implications compared to the consumer implications are really, really interesting. All right, so a couple things you need to know. You need to know there are platform authenticators, right, which is this thing, right? Cameras, fingerprint readers, whatever you could imagine to build in to a device. There are roaming authenticators, and it matters because it changes how the dance goes, right? With a roaming authenticator, this, for example, you probably can't see it very well. This one has a little NFC label on it, right? So this one, I don't technically have to insert into a USB port. I can tap it, right? Tap it on my phone, and I get in, right? So USB, BLE, NFC, all of those transports are supported by what's called the CTAP protocol, right? This is all the work we've been doing. And then there's this WebAuthn API. And all the WebAuthn does is allows a cloud server to ask, right? To ask to interact with the hardware, right? Please, can you ask the user to do their dance and send me back a public key that's been released by the dance, right? Super easy. All right, so here's the cool thing about them, right? Where the business benefits. Well, business benefit is you don't have to run a certificate authority, right? Now compare that to, say, client certificates. Right? When you think about what it means not to have to run a CA to do client certificates, it's a big deal. You may still want to do it for other reasons, right? You still may want to run smart cards or do other things like that. But you don't have to do it in order to run these keys. These keys do have a certificate authority, but it's the manufacturer of the keys, right? So in this case, it is a manufacturer called Fashion, and in this case, it's a manufacturer called Yubico. So they are responsible for the integrity of these keys, not you, right? So they do it once for their entire customer base, right? It's much, much more efficient than you having to do it for your specific enterprise. Now, the other cool thing about this is the provisioning piece, right? Because the CA spans the entire manufacturer, it means that you don't have to be in charge of distribution of these tokens anymore, right? How much of a pain is it to get a bundle of oath tokens and have to then distribute them to every single employee? Right? I don't know how many people here have done that. A few, I'm assuming, right? How hard is it to get remote employees in to get their smart card, right? Well, now, if you have a remote, let's say you're in healthcare and you have a nurse who's in a remote location, right? She's in Yellowknife, for example, and she loses her token. What is she going to do? She's going to get on Amazon. She's going to order another one, right? And people who are professional delivery people get to send it to her. And then this can be online enrolled, right? Super easy, so much better. All right, I'm going to show it. Oh, wait, let me just do a time check. Oh yeah, we got lots of time. Wait, I'm sorry. I'm going to have a coughing fit if I don't continue to drink water. All right, any questions from the peanut gallery while I'm getting this started?
Why aren't people doing it just to a smartphone yet? Like, why can't we link this, which everybody seems to have, to an application that's running on your desktop?
You can do it now. You can do it now, absolutely. In fact, Microsoft Authenticator will do it today. What it isn't is standardized, right? There are tons of proprietary solutions, right? And I think the other thing that you bring up, so you can do passwordless authentication today, right? What this gives you is a different kind of portability. This gives you portability, right? This means you can use this key for your Google authentication, for your GitHub authentication, right? So you can actually cross identity providers as well, right? So that makes a big difference. But the other thing is, so this is one piece.
Carry, right?
Pardon?
It's another thing to carry.
It's another thing to carry, and some people will hate it, right? And some people will love it. What I love about this, the thing that makes me laugh about this, is I think of Windows repair disks, right? You remember the floppy, right, that you had to install in 1998, right? And then you had to put it in a drawer somewhere, and then you could never find it when disaster struck. Well, that's what these could be, right? So the nice thing about these detachable, cheap ones is that you bind it to your account. you throw it in your safety deposit box, right? And if everything goes crazy, you know you can always get back into your account, right? So yeah, these are going to have different uses than this, right? The Authenticator app has a ton of additional advantages than just a simple dance that this has, right? And so, you're probably going to want something that's a mix of all of those things together.
Yeah, because how many of us have had a phone that goes belly up?
Right.
Either because your kid pretends he's scoring a touchdown and spikes it, or
my kid threw it in the toilet once.
Yeah, okay. Or you're dancing, you do some crazy move and it goes flying and shatters. I'm just coming up with common everyday kind of thing.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So the trick of this is that no one thing is ever going to be the answer. So the trick is to have lots of things, right? So, you get this, you combine them, and all of a sudden you have a resiliency that we really haven't had before. All right, so let me show you this baby. Super easy. Let's start.
Oh, Pam, one other question.
Yeah.
Sorry. There are some work environments where people are not allowed to have their cell phone. For example, in a lot of companies require that employees use cell phones in lockers.
Yes.
And in the clean room, there are gloves, different masks, so a lot of the biometrics aren't available. So having something small like a wiki or something else like that, the same form factor, could be the solution for them to do second factor, where it's easy, it's small, it's something they have.
Yep, absolutely.
Probably a lot cheaper than a retina scanner.
Yeah, that's the thing. They're cheap, right? They're cheap. And you can choose how cheap they are. Like, different solutions have different costs. But the great thing is that people can compete on that, right? They can sell you the thing now that has the right risk tolerance for your business or for your personal requirements. And you don't have to then try to convince your vendor to integrate it, right? That's the other thing that you get out of this is instant interoperability. Right? So I really do believe that 1,000 flowers will bloom now that this specification is starting to be ratified. All right, so let's give it a try here. I'm going to do the platform authenticator first, right? Because again, to your point, right? The easiest authenticator is no authenticator at all, right? So I'm just going to register my platform authenticator here. And this is what you're going to see, right? Scan your finger on the fingerprint reader. It's registering, and here's what I get. I get a public key that's been released, right? And there's behind the scenes, so if I actually open up developer tools, what you're going to see is the attestation that's coming out of this, right? So here's your attestation object. It's in base 64. So you can see all of it, right? You can see here's the JSON, right? It was a WebAuthn create API call that got made. Can you guys see it? Is it big enough? I can make it bigger. Yeah. All right. You can see that token binding is supported on this. That's a piece I'll talk about in a minute. And you can see there's in this case, there's no user handle because it's a registration, right? There's only two verbs in the whole API, right? Make me a credential and fetch me a credential. That's it, right? Super easy. You register or you authenticate. But these attestation objects can actually contain more information. So here's the response. Right? So you can see there's a challenge that comes back. So there's a whole bunch of stuff, right? Nonces and junk, right? That you should never have to care about, that makes sure that there can't be a man in the middle in the process of calling this and negotiating with the authenticator. Yeah?
So if we have a closed loop system, is there a way to implement this into a closed?
By closed loop, you mean offline? Yes. So you can embed an HMAC secret in order to do offline stuff. It is an extension, though. So the important thing that you need to know is that when you're shopping for your tokens, they have to support HMAC secret. Now, what we've done is we've defined what we call Microsoft compatible keys, right? So the stuff you're going to see come from us has to have an HMAC secret. We're just making it the case across the board. The other thing that we're requiring is that all of these authenticators have pins set. Right? So, for example, I'll show you the next one. She says, sniffling. Right? So this next one is from a company called Yubico, right? And you can use this today at Google and GitHub, but it uses a different specification. It uses still part of the FIDO Alliance, It's called U2F, right? The important difference between U2F and the FIDO2 WebAuthn specification is that it stands for universal second factor. So when I use it at Google, I still have to type my password. It doesn't eliminate my password. So I will type my password, I will insert this, and then because it's a second factor, right? Oh, that was nice. They just allow you to tap it and you're done, right? But because we want to use FIDO2 for passwordless authentication, that's not good enough, right? The last thing you want is to be able to instantly log in with a thing that you just picked up off the floor, right? So we require a PIN in the case where there's no biometric or other user verification piece. So let's go back and do this. So I'm going to register now a roaming authenticator here. All right, so the first thing it's going to ask me is for a PIN. And again, this is an extension to the specification, right? It's used, we use it in FIDO2. It's a very secure PIN. I don't know if you saw what I typed, you probably didn't. Okay, now it's saying take action. So the thing is that, that PIN in theory could be replayed by a bot somewhere, right? But touching the key is what actually releases the private key, right? So this concept of a gesture, the user has to interact somehow before this private key gets released, right? So that's the piece that kind of gives it its oomph. This is not made for machines. It's made for human beings. So there it is. I now have a credential that's created here. And now you can imagine every time I authenticate, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, very secure. We can't fix that yet. And action on the security key. Okay? Great. Some of you might be like, oh my God, pins, I can't stand pins, right? So let's try this one. Right, we'll set this one up. Now this time it's just saying take action on your security key. And it's my fingerprint, right? That's it, I'm in. So here's the trick. You're going to have multiple authenticators. What you want to do is start tailoring them as a feedback loop to your entire session, right? So maybe you log in, you log in with your fingerprint reader that's resident on the device, right? And then maybe you have to tap this token later if and only if the risk goes high. That's kind of how it's going to start going, right? So there will be imaginative ways to deploy this stuff that allow you to change up the risk, right? Maybe you ask for this one in one circumstance and a different one in another circumstance, right? Maybe you ask for the NFC-enabled one when you're on the phone, right? Compared to asking for the USB-enabled one when you're on a computer. All of this stuff is possible.
So from a standards perspective, you mentioned there's sort of the Google GitHub standard and there's what Microsoft's doing generally. Mm-hmm. Do you expect this to persist similar to like SAML and WS Federation as an ongoing, there's going to be these two divergent paths and you got to kind of pick one?
Well, based on historical record, I would say absolutely. I mean, standards don't die. Much to the upset anger of some of the analysts, right, who like to declare them dead. They never actually die, right? They go forever. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? I mean, you don't want to have to rip and replace all your SAML installations just because somebody thinks OpenID Connect is cool, right? So no, I absolutely think there's actually, in fact, 3 families in the FIDO Alliance world. There's UAF, which is a universal first factor, U2F, which is a universal second factor, and then the FIDO2 family, right, which is WebAuthn, and that's the API that lets you trigger from the cloud, and CTAP, and CTAP is what lets you negotiate via USB and NFC and all of those things, right? So all of those are going to coexist, I believe.
So is there a relationship between UAF, U2F, and CTAP? Currently that they overlap substantially, but it wasn't clear to me exactly what the overlap was.
They do overlap. So FIDO2 tries to encapsulate everything, right? So there's backwards compatibility between U2F and WebAuthn. And the UAF stuff as well has bits of that. And the funny thing about it is that different parts of the world have different existing installations for UAF, for example. So UAF is really commonly used. You may be using it today and you don't even know it. It gets built into things where facial recognition, for example, is just a part of an application, right? So that standard, all of these manufacturers, they write UAF certified facial recognition or whatever else. and then it's just silently included. So I don't think any of these are going away, and there's still active interest in all of them. The goal of Fido is to have it all in one, right? And the other thing that's exciting about the Fido WebAuthn is that it has browser support, right? So right now, Edge supports it right now. Chrome supports some of it and is working on the rest. Mozilla is. There may have been sightings of certain other manufacturers whose browsers you might want to include in things at various standards events, but they have to make their own statements. So yes.
Does Edge support U2F, or will it ever support U2F?
Edge will. So not everything in U2F is supported, as I understand it. You can use a U2F credential with the WebAuthn standard, but if you want to do pure U2F, then you're going to hit edge cases along the way. Yeah, and we're creating a matrix of what all of those things are. You're going to see it. It's going to take a while for this to come right. There's going to be worlds where it's all one or all the other, and they'll have to cross slowly.
The organizations who are rolling out Hello for Business today, do you see FIDO2 being rolled into that sort of edge?
Absolutely. In fact, the way that Microsoft has rolled this out is the first thing we did was we built support into Windows Hello for Business. So, when I did my fingerprint on this laptop, it was Windows Hello for Business. All of the prompts you saw were, in fact, Windows Hello for Business that were interacting. So if you've got something that's Windows Hello for Business certified, then it's, the idea is it's just going to work, right? And the one thing you also might not need to know, from a camera perspective, the only cameras that are supported by Windows Hello for Business, and therefore by FIDO2 on a Microsoft platform, have to have concurrency, right? So there has to be 2 cameras, and they have to be able to do liveness tests, right? So chances are, a lot of these laptops just don't have the cameras. You can buy some super nice peripheral cameras if you want to do facial recognition that's super secure. But these are the kinds of details that we'll get ironed out over time as we get hardware iterations and all that kind of stuff come up.
Does one of those tokens work over NFC with iOS and iPhone? For WebAuthn? The UP will. Is that for WebAuthn?
I believe so.
Because I know it works for WebAuthn, but for
yeah, I've seen the U2F stuff work over NFC with the Android phone. I've seen the iPhone stuff work with YubiKey, but I don't know. I can't speak to exactly what process that happens and whether there's proprietary elements in there. So.
I think it's still depends on the dongle. NFC uses lockdown. I think still to the specific
I think so. But the cool thing about this is there's so much research to be done. It's a real frontier right now. There's so much cool stuff that you can go discover and write about, right? And we would love that, right? So, Microsoft, the whole goal is not to tell you what to do, but to have you tell us what's important, right? So getting out there, trying this, and giving us feedback is really, really valuable.
From a security perspective, there are so many tools available to read NFC communication. How do you ensure that the affinity of the user is attached to this relationship?
Okay, that's a good question. So there's a bunch of ways I can unpack that, right? So one is, how do you know that you're really getting the key for the user that you think you're getting, right? Okay, so the way that works, the brilliance of these little keys is that they can't be phished, right? In the way that a user can be phished. So when you phish a user, you can show them Bark of America, right? And it looks like Bank of America, and they can log in, right? With these, whatever domain presents itself, they will generate a new key for that domain, right? So if somebody tries to phish you and they send you, they interact with your key, they get a different public key than the one that would have been given to your bank, right? So it's very, very simple. There's a pairing between the domain and the key.
But at that time, the issuer will have a single point of failure, right?
A single point of failure.
You're talking about cloning the NFC ID on the device?
Possibly.
Yeah, because it can lock down these scenarios where the vendor got compromised.
Yeah, you really don't want your vendor to get compromised. There's no doubt. So you're talking about this vendor, if this vendor gets compromised? Yeah, but you can also do things. The thing is, if you lose this, or if it gets compromised, you can swap it out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, here the situation is that you have time.
Yes. Well, and you need to do your homework, right? You need to talk to your vendors and actually ask them, how well do they protect their metadata?
These are, while these vendors are small mom and pop shop, just coming out, they are not even have a CNC built into the organization. And how do you promote a token which has got that kind of small?
Well, even if it's mom and pop, I mean, look at RSA.
Yeah, even RSA got compromised.
Right. Well, I do know IBM, for example, has an authenticator that's certified. I believe Vasco, if you guys know, or OneSpan, now Vasco, they've got one that's been compromised. So Gemalto HID, right? So that's your decision to make as to where your tolerances are, ultimately. But hopefully the crypto is solid. That's what we're hoping.
Just basically, my thought is that when Microsoft, such a big brand, promote these tokens, saying that it is under the Microsoft umbrella,
well,
then you get compromised too, right, in the brand image perspective.
Well, here's the thing. We're not trying to promote any one vendor, right? We're trying to promote the standard. That's the really important thing, right? Everyone gets to choose what interacts with that standard.
Okay, so I have pretty limited understanding, so this isn't a set question. But so you talked about the standard, so you're saying that when you can swap it out, it uses this logic or in the algorithm where they have the domain, and the domain, if it's different, will present a different public key, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's part of the standard, right? So if I had 3 different FIDO tokens or whatever, they would all present the same public key for that domain?
They would not. They would all present different public keys.
For the same domain?
For the same domain.
Because it's to a different manufacturer? Is that why? Or?
Yes. So this thing, the private key, public key pairs never leave the device, right? So when I request of this individual key to make a credential, it only makes a credential that's good for this key. They're not centrally stored.
Okay, so then
Yeah.
in the case where you said you could swap it out, right? So like, let's say that you're with vendor 1,
Mm-hmm.
and you're like, this vendor sucks, or it's compromised, or whatever.
Right.
To vendor 2. So now you re-register, right?
You're going to re-register.
Okay.
Yeah. You need robust account recovery techniques, right?
Okay.
You're going to have lots of options. And so you want to log in via a strong option and disallow this key and then enable whatever other key you want.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Jeremy?
So Pam, there's been a lot of conversation about swapping out keys, and if the nurse in some part of Canada that I'm not familiar with loses their key, they can just go to Amazon and order a new one.
Mm-hmm.
Are you aware of any standards effort that's being done around ways to securely bootstrap either the first key or to swap to a different key, right? Because in that case where we're using that key not only as a strong single factor, we're also perhaps using it for elevated risk, as you mentioned, for a strong second factor.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want somebody to use a weak factor to enroll a strong factor.
Right.
So are you aware of any standards that are being worked on to try to solve that problem? Because that's a problem I'm really interested in.
Yes. So the FIDO Alliance is a foundation, and it is the foundation that certifies these keys. They are working on account recovery right now. So that's one of the working group. The charter for the working group covers that kind of spec. I don't know what the progress is on it. There's also a white paper that they're working on writing right now about account recovery, right? So it will be, at least for the foreseeable future, a best practice, right? So you will need to step the user up to a strong enough context for them to safely add a key, right? And that might mean multiple things. It might mean password, SMS, and a KBA. It could mean you could be having to deploy lots of different authenticators, right? So, but you do have to watch your standards. You can't allow it to become, you can't have them add a strong authenticator in a weak context, right? So absolutely. All right, I got 7 minutes left. Chris, go ahead.
So the one area you haven't covered is how do you revoke? Because if you're nursing Pamela, their YubiKey still is valid until it's revoked.
It is valid till it's revoked. The private key never goes away, right? The key pair stays on the machine. You just remove the linkage.
Anybody picking it up can still use it.
As long as they have the PIN or the biometric.
Yes.
They have to perform the user verification.
If it's a simple one, they just need to touch it and they happen to know the user's password because it's written on the whiteboard because they think having the key is so it's public knowledge, then it's usable until somebody revokes it.
It is. That's correct. It can be an issue. Keep in mind, though, that all of this technology is going to get better and better, right? So you think of the ground speed detection that you can do right now for people attempting to log in, right? You can start to do those kinds of things with lost tokens as well, right? So there's AI that gets layered over top of it. But yeah, I mean, it is a possession token, right? The fact that I have it is meaningful. And so if somebody else has it, that's meaningful too. So it's not a panacea. It's not going to, fix everything. But it does mitigate against some of the scenarios. All right, one more.
Yeah, I mean, I think of it as almost anything is better than just pure user ID password today. So, the physical device definitely makes it more secure. It might not be perfect, but I think it's way better than what a lot of people's password policies probably are.
Absolutely. Well, what I do like about this form factor is you can give this to someone who's not super technology savvy, right? Because all they need to know, I literally didn't give you any of the details of the specification today, right? You didn't see any of the attestations, anything like that. But you take the thing and you shove it in the computer and you type your PIN, right? So that is the exciting piece about it, and it's only going to get better.
Yeah, what's the standard framework that takes this private and public combinations and authorize the resources? Do you have any towards that?
The standard?
Authorizing resources, like what we do in already kind of similar way. How do we take this credentials and authorize?
Yes, so this is composable, right? FIDO2 can compose with OpenID Connect, right? And what you can do is something called token binding, right? So token binding, how many people here have heard of token binding? Okay, this is the coolest, geekiest thing on the planet, and I only have 4 minutes to explain it, so this is going to be fun. Token binding is what happens when you take the cryptographic elements of a private key and you encode it into the token in such a way that you can use the SSL channel to prove that the client that is serving you the token is the client to which the token was issued. Okay, so you literally are when you negotiate a TLS session, you are embedding entropy into that TLS session based on the private key, right? It could be software, it could be hardware. Okay, that entropy is embedded into the TLS session, and then it is also embedded into the token. Okay, so if your TLS session is, if you can use your TLS session to prove that you own the private key, and you have a token that also can be proven to be related to that private key, right? You have this incredibly strong bond. Okay, the problem is it's really strong. It's super strong. It's strong enough that it doesn't work if somebody terminates the SSL in between, which means proxies are a problem, right? So there's an additional specification for how you can use a terminating proxy with token binding. But imagine that. Imagine knowing that there is literally no proxy between the client that's giving you the token for you to validate.
TLS 1.3 implements perfect secrecy.
Perfect forward secrecy in TLS 1.3. Yep, that's true.
Actually, so this private key will be used to initiate the connection for the SSL, or is just after the connection is being established?
So this key is going to be used to sign all sorts of things, right? This is, for example, decentralized identity is one example of this. Imagine that your FIDO token that you use can be used to validate the public key that's stored on the blockchain, right? That is issued and stored there, and you're going to use, instead of using, centralized identity. Instead of logging in with your Facebook credential, you're going to log in with your identity, whose keys are stored on the blockchain.
And this, I'm sorry, I came on.
Nope, it's.
You said you have this in the edge. So it's in a separate sandbox within the edge, or is it something you have as a cookie in the system?
So the pieces are there today. So we're using token binding, for example, to protect your refresh tokens when you fetch a refresh token from Azure Active Directory, right? So we issue you a token that is bound to the SSL connection on it. It doesn't have anything to do with this token, with the FIDO token, but it is a bound token that is linked to your SSL session. So, all right, we can take that offline and we can dig way deeper if you want to dig deeper. Yeah, but I want to just finish off here with something very important. So this is my idea of proper authorization, right? Your devices should just turn off when it's sunny and beautiful, and you should really be outside instead of inside. So that would be my conditional access policy that I would write if I could. But at this point, we are going to try and see if people want to get into groups to do haikus. And if you're interested, let's see, raise your hand if you're interested in sort of trying to group engineer haiku. Okay, so you've got some folks in the room. A lot of them are kind of leaders of the community and super smart and worth getting to know. Oh, and my hand's up too, right? So if you want to sit and see if you can write the kickest buttest haiku on the planet, wait, put your hands up again. Memorize these faces. Find some of us, and we'll see if you can beat that. That's the plan. All right, thanks everybody. I appreciate it.